The Montana sky hung low and threatening, heavy with the promise of an early winter storm. Samuel Mackenzie pulled his worn leather coat tighter as he made his evening rounds, his weathered boots crunching through the first frost that had settled over his ranch. The wind carried the sharp bite of snow, and he could feel it in his bones. This would be a harsh night. Sam had been alone on this land for 12 years now, ever since the fever took Mary and the horse through young Thomas. The silence had become his companion, broken only by the lowing of cattle and the whistle of prairie wind through the gaps in his cabin walls. At 52, his face bore the deep lines of a man who had seen too much sorrow, his grey beard streaked with white, and his blue eyes held the distant look of someone who had learned to expect nothing good from the world. The barn stood solid against the approaching storm, its wooden frame creaking in the wind. Sam pushed open the heavy door, breathing in the familiar scents of hay and leather. His horses, Bell and Thunder, nickered softly in their stalls, sensing the weather's change. He moved through his routine with practiced efficiency, checking the water troughs, ensuring the feed was secure, and making certain everything was battened down for the night. As he climbed the ladder to the hayloft to pull down fresh fodder for the morning, something made him pause. There in the far corner behind a stack of hay bales was a shape that didn't belong. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip as he approached cautiously. "Come out of there," he called, his voice rough from disuse. "I can see you hiding." A small whimper escaped from behind the hay, and Sam's expression softened slightly. He moved closer, lantern held high, and found himself looking down at a child, a little girl with tangled auburn hair and enormous green eyes that reflected his lamplight like a frightened animal's. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, wearing a dress that had once been blue but was now stained with mud and torn at the sleeves. Her face was gaunt with hunger, and she trembled as she pressed herself further into the corner, clutching a small cloth bundle to her chest. "Easy there, child," Sam said, setting the lantern down and crouching to her level. "I'm not going to hurt you. What are you doing in my barn?" The girl said nothing, but her eyes darted toward the barn door, as if calculating her chances of escape. Sam noticed how her small fingers clutched that bundle, probably everything she owned in the world. "You hungry?" he asked, and at the word hungry, her stomach answered with a loud growl that echoed in the loft. Despite himself, Sam felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in years, compassion for another living soul. "My name's Sam," he continued, keeping his voice gentle. "This is my ranch. You've been hiding here long?" The girl finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 days, mister. I didn't take nothing but some grain for the horses. I was careful not to bother them." Her accent carried traces of something European, German maybe, or Polish. Sam had heard similar inflections from the immigrant families who sometimes passed through on their way west, seeking the promise of new land and fresh starts. "Where are your folks, child?" At this question, tears began to well in her eyes. "Dead, sir. The wagon. There was an accident crossing the river. I was the only one who made it out." The simple, matter-of-fact way she delivered this devastating news hit Sam harder than he expected. He recognized that particular kind of numbness, the way the mind protects itself when loss is too great to comprehend all at once. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first fat raindrops began to patter against the barn roof. The storm was arriving, and Sam made a decision that surprised even him. "Well," he said, standing up and brushing hay from his knees, "you can't stay up here all night in this weather. Come on down to the house. We'll get some food in you and figure out what to do come morning." The girl hesitated, clearly torn between her desperate need for help and the wariness that had kept her alive on her own for who knows how long. "I promise you're safe," Sam added, and something in his tone must have convinced her, because she slowly uncurled from her hiding spot and followed him down the ladder. As they crossed the yard toward his cabin, the storm broke in earnest, sending sheets of rain across the prairie. Sam found himself walking slower than usual, making sure the child could keep up with his longer strides. At his door he paused, his hand on the handle. It had been 12 years since another soul had crossed this threshold. The cabin held too many memories, too many reminders of the family he'd lost. But looking down at this small, bedraggled figure shivering beside him, Sam knew he couldn't turn her away into the storm. The door creaked open, and for the first time in over a decade, Samuel Mackenzie's home welcomed another human being. Emma, for that was the name she had whispered to him over a bowl of hot beans and cornbread, slept curled in Mary's old rocking chair by the fireplace, wrapped in Thomas's childhood quilt. Sam sat at his kitchen table in the pre-dawn darkness, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the rise and fall of her small chest. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside clean and sharp under a blanket of early snow. Sleep had eluded him through the night. Every time he'd closed his eyes, he'd been confronted with memories he'd worked years to suppress. Mary humming while she cooked breakfast, Thomas's laughter echoing from the very chair where this strange child now rested. The cabin felt different with another person in it, less like a tomb and more like, well, more like a home. Emma stirred as the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows, her eyes blinking open with the wariness of someone accustomed to danger. She sat up quickly, disoriented, and her gaze found Sam across the room. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You're safe." She relaxed slightly but remained alert, her small hands gripping the quilt. In the morning light, Sam could see more clearly the toll her ordeal had taken. Her cheeks were hollow, her wrists thin as bird bones, and there was a premature gravity in her eyes that no child should carry. "Are you going to send me away?" she asked, and the question was asked with such resignation that it broke something inside Sam's carefully guarded heart. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. The practical part of him knew he should take her to the sheriff in town, let the proper authorities figure out what to do with her. He was no good with children, hadn't been even when Thomas was alive. This ranch was no place for a little girl, especially with winter coming on. But then she coughed, a small, fragile sound, and he remembered how she'd thanked him 3 times the night before for the simple meal he'd given her, how she'd folded her torn dress so carefully before wrapping herself in the quilt, how she'd whispered, "Good night, Mr. Sam," with such politeness, despite everything she'd been through. "I reckon you can stay until we figure things out proper," he said finally. "But there'll be rules. This is a working ranch and I won't have you underfoot while I'm trying to get things done." A smile, the first he'd seen from her, lit up Emma's face like sunrise. "I can work, Mr. Sam. I'm small, but I'm strong. Papa always said I was his best helper." "We'll see about that," Sam muttered, but there was no heat in it. He stood up, suddenly uncomfortable with the emotion he felt stirring. "First things first. You need proper clothes and a decent meal. Can't have you catching your death in those rags." He rummaged through an old trunk in the bedroom, pulling out some of Thomas's smaller shirts and a pair of trousers that might work with a good belt. When he returned to the main room, Emma was standing by the window, looking out at the snow-covered pastures where his cattle were beginning to move toward the feeding areas. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Like the pictures in Mama's book about America." "It's hard country," Sam replied, setting the clothes on the chair. "Beautiful maybe, but it doesn't forgive mistakes. You'll need to learn that if you're staying." Emma nodded solemnly, as if she understood the weight of his words better than most adults would. She took the clothes gratefully, and Sam stepped outside to give her privacy to change. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of snow and cattle. Sam breathed deeply, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, purpose beyond mere survival. He had animals to tend, fences to mend, hay to move before the next storm. But now he also had a responsibility that went beyond the ranch. When Emma emerged, drowning in Thomas's old clothes but looking more like a child and less like a refugee, Sam felt an unexpected tightness in his throat. She'd managed to tie back her hair with a piece of string, and her chin was set with determination. "What can I do to help?" she asked. Sam considered her for a moment. She was too small for most ranch work, but he could see the eagerness in her eyes, the need to prove her worth. It reminded him of Thomas at that age, always wanting to be useful, to be part of the important work. "Can you carry a bucket without spilling half of it?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Then you can help me water the horses. But you stay close, and you do exactly what I tell you. These animals are bigger than you are, and they can hurt you without meaning to." As they walked toward the barn together, Emma's small hand found its way into his weathered one. The gesture was so natural, so trusting, that Sam almost pulled away. But something stopped him. Maybe the memory of Thomas's hand in his, or maybe just the simple human need for connection that he'd denied himself for too long. "Mr. Sam?" Emma's voice was small in the vast Montana morning. "Yeah? Thank you for not sending me away." Sam squeezed her hand gently, surprising himself. "Don't thank me yet, child. Winter's coming, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us." But as they approached the barn, where Belle and Thunder were waiting for their morning care, Sam found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, the work wouldn't seem quite so lonely anymore. 3 weeks had passed since the storm brought Emma to Sam's doorstep, and the Montana landscape had transformed into a stark winter wonderland. Snow lay thick across the rolling hills, and the morning air bit sharp enough to make breath visible in crystalline puffs. Sam had watched Emma adapt to ranch life with a resilience that both impressed and worried him. She was too young to carry such strength, yet circumstances had forged it into her character like steel tempered in fire. Emma had proven herself more capable than Sam had initially believed. She could indeed carry water buckets without spilling, though she had to use both hands and move slowly. She'd learned to scatter grain for the chickens he kept behind the cabin, and she could brush the horses' coats while Sam cleaned their hooves. Most importantly, she listened, really listened, when he gave instructions, understanding that mistakes on a ranch could mean the difference between life and death. This particular morning found them in the barn before sunrise, preparing for what Sam knew would be a difficult day. The weather had been turning colder each night, and he'd spotted signs that worried him, the way the cattle had begun clustering together more tightly, how the wild geese had been flying south in greater numbers. Another big storm was coming, and they needed to move the herd closer to the winter shelter. "Mr. Sam," Emma said, her voice muffled by the thick scarf Mary had knitted years ago that now wrapped around the child's neck. The brown cow with the white face. She's been standing by herself again. Sam looked up from where he was checking Thunder's saddle. Emma had a good eye for the animals, something he'd noticed over the past weeks. She seemed to sense when something was wrong before he did sometimes. "Show me," he said, and they walked to the barn door together. Sure enough, Bessie, the Hereford cow Emma had described, stood apart from the main herd, her head hanging lower than usual. Sam frowned, studying the animal's posture and movement. After 25 years of ranching, he could read cattle like other men read newspapers. "She's favoring her left front leg," he observed. "Probably stepped wrong on some frozen ground." He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Emma, I need to bring her in to take a look at that leg." "Think you can help me?" The little girl straightened with pride. Over the weeks, Sam had begun including her in more of the ranch decisions, explaining his reasoning as they worked. It was something he'd done with Thomas, and he found himself falling back into the pattern naturally. "What do you need me to do?" Emma asked. "I'm going to rope her and lead her toward the barn. You stay by the gate and be ready to close it once she's through. But you keep yourself safe first. If she gets spooked and runs toward you, you get behind that fence post quick as you can." Emma nodded seriously, understanding that this wasn't play but real work, with real consequences. She took her position by the gate while Sam approached Bessie with a coiled rope. The cow was docile enough, used to human handling, and allowed herself to be led toward the barn without much fuss. As Sam examined the cow's leg, Emma watched intently, asking quiet questions about what he was looking for and how he could tell if the injury was serious. Her curiosity reminded him painfully of Thomas, who had peppered him with similar questions at that age. "It's not too bad," Sam concluded, running his hands carefully along the cow's leg. "Some swelling, but no break. We'll keep her in the barn for a few days. Let her rest it." He looked at Emma. "Good eye, spotting that. You might make a rancher yet." The compliment brought a flush of pleasure to Emma's cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. Sam realized it was the first time he'd praised her abilities so directly, and he felt a small pang of guilt. The child had been working so hard to prove herself useful, to earn her place, and he'd been too guarded with his approval. Later that afternoon, as they sat by the fire eating a simple lunch of bread and preserved meat, Emma asked the questions Sam had been dreading. "Mr. Sam, what's going to happen to me when spring comes?" He'd been avoiding this very topic, telling himself they had time to figure things out. But winter wouldn't last forever, and the child deserved honesty about her future. "I don't rightly know," he admitted, setting down his coffee cup. "I suppose I should take you to town, see if there's a family looking to take in a child." Emma's face fell, though she tried to hide it. "Of course, I understand. I'm grateful for what you've done already." The formal politeness was back in her voice, the same tone she'd used that first night when she was trying so hard not to be a burden. It cut at Sam more than he cared to admit. "Emma," he said carefully, "what would you want to happen if you could choose?" She was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but clear. "I'd want to stay here, with you. I know I'm not your real daughter, and I know you didn't ask for me, but this feels like home now. The first real home I've had since Mama and Papa died. Sam felt something crack inside his chest. Not breaking, but opening, like ice giving way to spring water. For 12 years he'd kept his heart locked away, convinced that caring for someone again would only lead to more loss and pain. But looking at this brave little girl, who'd somehow found her way into his life, he realized that maybe the greater tragedy would be letting fear keep him from caring at all. "This ranch is no easy place to grow up," he said slowly. "Winters are hard, and there's no other children around for miles. You'd have to be strong, and you'd have to learn things most little girls never need to know." Emma's eyes lit up with hope. "I am strong, Mr. Sam, and I want to learn. I want to be useful, to help take care of the animals and the land." Sam nodded, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "Then I reckon we'll see how it goes. But come spring, I'll need to make it legal proper, adoption papers and such, if that's what you truly want." Emma's smile was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She launched herself from her chair and wrapped her thin arms around Sam's neck in a fierce hug that caught him completely off guard. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for letting me stay." Sam awkwardly patted her back, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar sensation of being needed again. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin windows and promising another hard night ahead. But inside, by the warmth of the fire, something new was taking root, fragile still but growing stronger with each passing day. January brought the kind of cold that made the air itself seem brittle, where breath froze in beards and water turned to ice within minutes of being drawn from the well. Sam had seen many harsh winters in his years on the Montana plains, but this one was proving to be among the worst. The snow lay 4 feet deep in places, and the wind carved it into drifts that could bury a man. Emma had been with him for 3 months now, and Sam marveled at how completely she'd adapted to the rhythms of ranch life. She woke before dawn without being called, helped with the morning chores and never complained about the cold or the endless sameness of winter tasks. But Sam could see the isolation wearing on her, especially during the long evenings when the wind howled around the cabin and there was little to do but tend the fire and wait for morning. Tonight was such a night. Emma sat at the kitchen table, carefully writing letters on a slate board Sam had found in Thomas's old belongings. He'd been teaching her to read and write better. Her parents had given her some education, but there were gaps to fill. She formed each letter with the concentration of a craftsman, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. "Mr. Sam," she said, looking up from her work, "tell me about your boy, about Thomas." Sam's hand stilled on the leather harness he was mending. In all these months, Emma had never directly asked about his son, though she slept under Thomas's quilt and wore his clothes. The question caught him unprepared, stirring up emotions he'd thought were safely buried. "What would you like to know?" he asked carefully. "Was he my age when it happened?" "No," Sam said, his voice rougher than usual. "He was 15, almost a man grown, or so he thought, had his father's stubborn streak and his mother's kind heart." Emma nodded, absorbing this information. "What happened to him?" Sam set down the harness and stared into the fire. He'd never told this story to anyone, had barely been able to think about it without the pain doubling him over. But something about Emma's serious, accepting gaze made him feel like maybe it was time. "He was breaking a young horse," Sam began slowly. "A beautiful bay stallion that we'd been working with for weeks. Thomas he was good with horses. Better than me, truth be told. Had a gentle way about him that animals trusted." The wind rattled the windows and Sam pulled his chair closer to the fire. "But this horse was different, wilder. I told Thomas to wait, that we should work him longer on the lead rope. But Thomas was confident, maybe too confident. He climbed on, and for a minute it looked like it was going to be fine. Then something spooked the horse, maybe a hawk's cry, or just the devil in him, and he started bucking like nothing I'd ever seen." Emma's eyes were wide, but she didn't interrupt. "Thomas held on longer than most men could have, but when he finally came off," Sam's voice broke slightly. "His head hit a fence post. He never woke up." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the wind outside. Emma reached across the table and placed her small hand over Sam's work-worn one. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "He sounds like he was a good son." "He was," Sam managed. "The best. Do you think he would have minded? Me being here, I mean. Using his things." Sam looked at this earnest little girl who had somehow found her way into his guarded heart. Thomas had been generous and kind, Always the first to help a neighbor or care for an injured animal? No, Sam said with certainty. Thomas would have liked you, would have been glad his things were helping someone who needed them. Emma smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. I wish I could have met him. And your wife. Mary would have fussed over you something fierce, Sam said, surprised to find himself smiling at the memory. Would have had you in proper dresses and been teaching you to cook and sew, instead of letting you muck around in the barn in boys' clothes. I like the barn work, Emma said quickly, then caught herself. But I'd like to learn cooking and sewing too, if you think it's important. Sam studied her face in the firelight. She was trying so hard to be everything she thought he wanted, to earn her place through usefulness. It reminded him uncomfortably of himself after Mary and Thomas died, the way he'd thrown himself into ranch work, believing that if he just stayed busy enough, productive enough, the pain wouldn't catch up with him. Emma, he said seriously, you don't have to earn your place here. You belong because I want you here, not because of what you can do. Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. Really? Really? A sudden crash outside made them both jump. Sam was on his feet immediately, grabbing his coat and hat. Stay inside, he told Emma, but she was already reaching for her own coat. If something's wrong with the animals, you might need help, she said stubbornly. Sam started to argue, then realized she was right. If one of the barn doors had blown open in this wind, he'd need someone to help secure it, while he dealt with any panicked livestock. Together, they fought their way through the driving snow to the barn. Sure enough, the wind had torn one of the doors from its hinges, and Sam could hear the horses whinnying in distress inside. Snow was already accumulating in the doorway. Hold this, Sam shouted over the wind, handing Emma a lantern. Stay back, but keep the light steady. It took the better part of an hour to calm the animals, improvise a temporary repair on the door and clear the snow. By the time they made it back to the cabin, both were exhausted and chilled to the bone. As they sat by the fire, thawing out with hot coffee, Sam looked at Emma with new respect. She'd never once complained during the ordeal, had followed his instructions exactly, and had even suggested a better way to brace the damaged door. You did good tonight, he told her. Real good. Emma glowed at the praise, but then her expression grew serious. Mr. Sam, when spring comes and you make the adoption legal, will my name be Emma Mackenzie? Sam felt his throat tighten. If that's what you want. It is, she said firmly. I want to be part of your family, your real family. Looking at this determined little girl who had faced loss and hardship with such courage, who had brought life back into his empty house and purpose back into his days, Sam realized that she already was. Then, Emma Mackenzie it is, he said softly. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the cabin a new family was taking root, growing stronger with each storm they weathered together. The first warm day of April arrived like a gift, melting the last stubborn patches of snow and filling the air with the sound of running water and birdsong. Sam stood on his porch, breathing in the sweet scent of emerging grass and watching Emma race across the meadow, chasing a butterfly with the pure joy of a child, finally released from winter's grip. Her laughter rang out across the prairie, a sound that had become as natural to the ranch as the lowing of cattle or the whistle of wind through the trees. 6 months. It seemed impossible that so much could change in such a short time. The hollow-eyed, frightened waif he'd found in his barn had grown into a confident, capable girl who knew every animal on the ranch by name and could predict the weather as well as any old-timer. More importantly, she'd brought something back to life in Sam that he'd thought was dead forever, the ability to hope, to plan for a future that included someone else's happiness. Mr. Sam, Emma called, running back toward the house with something clutched in her hands. Look what I found. She opened her palms to reveal 3 pale blue eggs, delicate as porcelain, and no bigger than her thumb. Robin's eggs, Sam identified, though he'd known she already knew that. Emma had become an excellent student of the natural world, absorbing everything he taught her about reading signs in the landscape. Where'd you find the nest? In the old apple tree by the creek. The mama bird was scolding me something fierce when I got too close. Emma's eyes sparkled with mischief. Reminded me of Mrs. Patterson in town when Bobby Henderson tracked mud through her store. Sam chuckled. They'd made several trips to town over the winter months, and Emma had quickly become a favorite among the shopkeepers and townsfolk. Her combination of mature politeness and childish curiosity charmed nearly everyone she met. More importantly, no one had questioned Sam's story about taking in his distant cousin's orphaned daughter. In a land where people minded their own business and helped their neighbors without asking too many questions, Emma's presence had been accepted without fuss. "Speaking of town," Sam said, "we need to ride in tomorrow, got some business to take care of." Emma's face grew serious. She'd been dreading this day, even though she knew it was necessary. Tomorrow, Sam would file the adoption papers that would make her legally his daughter. It should have been a celebration, but Emma couldn't shake the fear that something would go wrong, that some official would decide she belonged elsewhere. "Are you worried?" Sam asked, reading her expression with the ease of practice. "A little," Emma admitted. "What if they say no? What if they decide I should go to one of those orphan houses back east?" Sam knelt down to her level, his weathered hands gentle on her shoulders. "Emma, listen to me. Judge Morrison has known me for 15 years. He's seen how well you've done here, how you've grown and thrived. There's not a soul in this county who would argue that you don't belong right here on this ranch. But, no buts," Sam said firmly. "You're my daughter in every way that matters. Tomorrow, we're just making it official on paper." That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Emma worked on a sampler she'd been stitching, a project suggested by Mrs. Chen, the seamstress in town who had taken it upon herself to ensure Emma learned proper feminine accomplishments alongside her ranch skills. The design was simple. "Home is where the heart is, surrounded by small flowers and birds." "It's beautiful," Sam said, looking over her shoulder at the careful stitches. "Your mother would be proud of how well you've learned." Emma looked up at him. "Which mother? The one who died, or the one I never had?" The question caught Sam off guard. Over the months, Emma had occasionally mentioned her birth parents, but always in the past tense, as if they belonged to someone else's life. This was the first time she'd seemed to struggle with the complexity of her situation. "Both, I think," Sam said carefully. "Your first mother gave you life and love for the first part of your childhood. She'd be glad to know you found safety and happiness. And Mary, well, Mary always wanted a daughter. If she were here, she'd be teaching you to bake bread and telling you stories about her own childhood." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I dream about them sometimes. My real parents, I mean. But they're getting harder to remember. Is that bad?" "No, sweetheart," Sam said, using the endearment that had slipped out naturally over the past few weeks. "That's just how memory works. The important things, how much they loved you, the good things they taught you, those don't fade. But the details get softer with time, and that makes room for new memories." "Good," Emma said with relief, "because I want to remember everything about being here with you. I want to remember learning to ride thunder, and the time we delivered the calf in the snowstorm, and how you taught me to read the weather in the clouds." Sam felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You'll remember, Emma, and we'll make plenty more memories to go along with them." The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect for the ride to town. Emma had dressed in her best outfit, a blue dress that Mrs. Chen had altered to fit her, with her hair braided neatly and tied with a matching ribbon. She looked every inch the proper young lady, though Sam could see the ranch girl in the confident way she mounted her pony and the calluses on her hands from months of hard work. The courthouse in Cedar Falls was a modest brick building that served the entire county. Judge Morrison, a portly man with kind eyes and a magnificent mustache, greeted them warmly in his chambers. "Well, Miss Emma," he said, settling behind his desk with the papers Sam had filed weeks earlier. "I hear you've been causing quite a stir on the Mackenzie ranch." Emma looked puzzled. "Causing a stir, sir?" "Indeed. Mrs. Patterson tells me you've been helping her reorganize her inventory system. Doc Henley says you've got a natural gift with injured animals. And Frank Muller swears you can predict when his milk cow is going to calve better than he can." The judge's eyes twinkled with amusement. "For a young lady who's only been in our county 6 months, you've certainly made an impression." "I just try to be helpful, sir," Emma said quietly. "And that's exactly what a good citizen should do," Judge Morrison said approvingly. He turned to Sam. "Samuel, I've known you since you first settled in this county. I watched you build your ranch from nothing, saw how you and Mary raised Thomas to be a fine young man. If you tell me this child belongs with you, that's good enough for me." The actual ceremony was simple, just signatures on legal documents that transformed Emma from a homeless orphan into Emma Mackenzie, legal daughter of Samuel Mackenzie, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. But as they left the courthouse, Emma clutching her copy of the adoption decree, Sam felt as if they'd just witnessed something miraculous. "So," he said as they prepared for the ride home, How does it feel to be Emma Mackenzie? Emma looked down at the papers in her hands, then up at Sam with a smile that outshone the April sun. It feels like coming home, she said simply. As they rode back toward the ranch, side by side across the rolling prairie, Sam reflected on the strange turns life could take. A year ago, he'd been a bitter, lonely man, convinced that his capacity for love had died with his family. Now, watching Emma point out a hawk circling overhead and chattering about her plans for a vegetable garden behind the cabin, he realized that love wasn't a finite resource that could be used up. Instead, it was something that grew stronger when shared, like a flame that could light countless candles without dimming. The ranch buildings came into view as they crested the final hill, looking solid and welcoming in the afternoon light. Smoke rose from the chimney. Sam had banked the fire carefully before they left, and it would be warm and cozy inside. There would be chores to do, supper to prepare, and plans to make for the growing season ahead. "Race you to the barn," Emma called, spurring her pony forward with a whoop of joy. Sam laughed, actually laughed out loud, and urged Thunder into a gallop, chasing his daughter across the land that would someday be hers, toward the home they'd built together from the ashes of loss and the promise of new beginnings. Behind them, the April sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new seasons to weather, new memories to create, but tonight the Mackenzie family would gather around their dinner table, secure in the knowledge that they belonged to each other and to this harsh, beautiful land that had shaped them both. In the end, Sam thought as he watched Emma's bright hair streaming behind her in the wind, sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as storms.